Hello everyone, Jason Fella here, and welcome to my first official painting lesson for the Joy of Digital Painting series. I've done a few introductory videos before, but this is the first video that we're actually going to do some painting, so I'm glad you're here. Now, this is the ultimate texturing technique is what I call this. Now, why do I call it that? That sounds like a pretty lofty statement. Well, 3 reasons. 1, because this technique is so easy and quick to learn and use. Number 2, it is extremely versatile. If you're doing landscapes, you'll use this technique on things like rocks and mountains, even tree bark. If you're doing human portraits, you can do human skin with this. Or if you're doing animals or still life, there's always something that I'm finding that I can use this technique on. And number 3, and perhaps most importantly, it gives fantastic results. Really, really great results. Now, there's only one con to this technique, and that is that it's very time intensive. And admittedly, it can get a little tedious at times, but the results really are worth it. Now, just to give you an idea of how easy and quick this is to learn, you're probably saying, you know what, Jason, I've heard guys say that to me before. I've heard Bob Ross say it. I've heard all these guys say it in all these different tutorials that I've watched or bought or whatever. And every time I try it, it sucks and it's hard and it doesn't look right. Well, just to give you an idea of how quick and easy this technique is to learn and to implement, look at this picture that I did, this portrait of Sir Christopher Lee. I did this a few years ago. Now, this was the very, very first time that I ever used this technique. This portrait is how I kind of stumbled upon this technique. Before that, I was doing skin with custom brushes and stuff like that, and it worked good a lot of times. But in this one painting, I just couldn't get it to look right. And so I took a step back and I kind of figured out, okay, what does his skin actually look like and how do I recreate that? And that was sort of the beginning of this technique. Now, I will do a video in the future where I show you specifically how to use this technique for skin. We're going to implement that a little bit differently for skin than we would for, say, rock or something like that. But essentially, the technique is the same. So trust me when I tell you that this technique is extremely easy to learn. I think you'll be happy with it the very first time out. All right, that's all the talking we need to do. Let's go out into the living room and let's start painting. Okay, everybody, I think I'm all set up in my living room. I got my shotgun mic going, so hopefully you can hear me okay. So what I've done is I've created a new project, and I have a really small canvas of 250 by 250 pixels. It's really small, but I just want to be able to show you what I'm going after here with this technique. Now, there's 2 things that this technique kind of hinges around. And one of the things is up here, you can see I've got this flow tool slider. Okay, normally it's on 100%, which means that as we paint, it's giving us the maximum amount of pigment the whole time we paint. Okay, now for this technique to work, what we're going to do is we're going to put this way down to like 5%. Okay, so what this means is that now as I paint, the pigment will come out. Well, I want to say that the pigment will come out slower, but that's not really accurate. The pigment will come out more transparent. But the more you go over an area again and again, the darker and more opaque it becomes. Okay? So I generally have it at about 5%. Now, the second thing that this technique hinges on is that we're going to use 3, or I should say at least 3 layers, 3 values or colors, to really give us the depth and the texture and the realism that we want. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just take a nice middle gray. You can see over here on my color palette, it's just a nice mid-value gray, and I'm just going to fill the canvas with that. Okay, now I'm going to come back and I'm going to add my dark tone. So I'm going to just drag it down to a nice dark gray. It doesn't have to be black, but just a nice dark gray, maybe a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to switch to my brush, and I'm just going to be using a good old hard round brush, the most basic brush there is in any painting program. Okay, my settings look okay. And you can have pressure sensitivity on or off for this particular lesson. It doesn't really matter. Okay, So now here's the basic technique. I've got my canvas set up. I've got my tool set up exactly how I need it. Now, this technique is very simple. All I'm going to be doing is basically scribbling. Okay, now you can see that I'm going over some areas just once. There's some areas where I'm not going over it at all, and there's some areas where I'm going to be going over multiple times. And you can see that each time I go over an area, it darkens up a little bit. So if I were to go over those areas, say 5 or 6 times, it would probably be completely black, or whatever color it is that I have selected, which in this case is just a nice dark gray. Okay, so I'm just going to go over this. This is basically the technique. Now, we're going to modify this in the future depending on what we're painting exactly. If we're doing human skin or tree texture or something like that, we're going to modify it a little bit. But for right now, this is just something that you could paint something like stone or wood, stone or rock with. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover the whole canvas this way. Now I'm going to go ahead and speed up the film for a couple minutes while I'm filling the rest of this canvas, because I'm going to be just doing the exact same thing that you've seen me do so far, okay? Just randomly scribbling over the canvas, all right? Okay, so I will be back in a couple minutes as soon as I get the rest of this canvas covered. Okay, so I'm back, everybody. Now, as you can see, I've covered the entire canvas with this dark value, and I went back over a few spots a little more so that we could get a little bit more variation in texture in certain areas. Okay, so right now, even with just 2 values, it's looking pretty good. We can see the beginnings definitely of some texture, of some depth. It's starting to look like something, okay? Now, if you wanted to, at this point, you could add another value. You don't have to necessarily go to your highlight value right away. You could go to, you know, maybe a slightly lighter one, maybe here or here. Go over it again, and then go over it yet a final time with your brightest highlight. But for now, for this demonstration, I'm just going to use one more value, and this will be our highlight value. So it's going to be a nice light value going towards white. Okay. And then I'm just going to go over the canvas again. Same exact thing, just... Okay, now this is an example. See how now when I'm doing it, the pigment is coming off a little bit too fast. Okay, so in this case, we could either lower this flow, but it's already pretty low. It's already at 5%, but I'm going to try and lower it down to 2%. still coming off a little bit too fast. So I'm going to just undo the last couple steps here. So when this happens, when it's just coming off too much, like too bright or too dark or too whatever color you have on there, you just need to lower it down a little bit. Okay, let's try that. Okay, that's okay. Okay, so now I'm just going over the canvas again. I'm going to decrease my brush size here. I accidentally made it too big. I didn't quite notice that. Okay, so you see now as I'm going over the canvas, it's really starting to mix in with the other two colors here, and we're starting to get a very definite texture. And again, I'm just scribbling, literally scribbling. There's no rhyme or reason to what I'm doing here. Now, if you're trying to create a finer texture, like if you're working on some kind of fabric maybe, then all you have to do is just tighten up whatever pattern you're using to scribble, just tighten it up a bit. Use smaller squiggles, smaller circles, smaller whatever. And if you want it to be a little bit more open or a coarse texture, then, you know, kind of widen everything up a little bit. And right now we're just creating kind of a general flat layer of texture. We're not trying to really sculpt or shape the canvas. We're not creating an object per se in this first lesson. I just want you to get used to the actual technique, which, as you can see, is not rocket science. This is pretty basic. It's like when you were a kid and you were just scribbling, you know? Now, the first few lessons we're going to work in monochrome, okay, which, you know, means black and white. But in later lessons we will start working in color also, and then you'll really start to see how much variation you can get just by picking slightly different hues, slightly different values. You can really ratchet up the depth and the realism of your textures. But working in monochrome is a great place to start. In fact, if I was to give you some advice to you beginners out there, I would say probably work in monochrome for like a full year before you even mess with color. And I'll talk more about that in future videos. But anyway, okay, so here we have the canvas is basically covered. And if you wanted, you know, you can keep going over certain areas more times to really, let's say you wanted to create a little bit of a raised area here. Just go over it more times. Maybe we want a little raised area down here. Let's go over it more times. Now just remember, when you're painting, by painting a dark value, that's going to push the thing away from the viewer. So it's going to make it recede into the background. If you want something to stand out and to move towards the viewer, then you lighten it up with a lighter value. So as I paint with this lighter value, see, it's bringing this part of the painting forward. Okay, and let's say we want to just experiment a little bit. I'm going to go over here back to my color picker, and I'm going to bring it back down to a nice dark gray. And let's say I just want to push some areas back a little bit more. Now let's go a little bit. Let's say I want to create a little bit of a depression here, a recess. So I just go over it more with the dark value, and see, now it looks like we're creating a little bit of a depression or a pit. Okay, so that's basically it. Now you can see that if I wanted to, I could really spend some time, you know, sculpting out some shapes and whatnot. But for now, I just wanted you to get used to the basic technique. This is very, very simple. Just play around, create a nice small canvas like I did, and just start playing around. You can mess with this for as long as you want. And it might take you a little bit to get used to your tool settings and get used to how the tool behaves based on a certain flow rate and all that, but you'll get it. And as I said, as you can see, this technique is very, very simple, and you can probably learn it in one sitting, but you will modify this as time goes along. You'll change it a little bit to suit your needs, or to suit your needs on a particular project. If you're trying to work on human skin or wood texture or whatever it is, you're going to modify it and make it your own. Okay? But that's basically all there is to it. Very straightforward. And as you can see, we created a pretty darn nice looking texture here, and this only took a few minutes. Okay? So play around with this. In the next lesson, we're going to take this one step further. It's just going to be a nice bite-sized lesson, just like this one. But in the next lesson, I'm going to show you how specifically to paint like a rock, like a big rock that you might see, you know, in the forest or on the beach or something. And then in the lesson after that, we're going to finish this sort of texture lesson with another lesson on how to paint rocks, but we're going to paint a larger rock formation, like you might see at the coast, you know, sticking up out of the water or something. And in that lesson, we're going to, since we've already learned the basic tools now, we've learned the basic technique, we understand about values, you know, lights and darks, and how to kind of sculpt and shape things, we're going to have a little more fun and actually try and create a bit of a more interesting shaped rock so you can really see how this works, okay? So I hope to see you in the next lesson. I hope this was an interesting lesson. I know it's not the most exciting thing yet, but I just wanted to do a nice bite-sized lesson so you could learn a very actionable skill and learn it right away and start painting. The next lesson, we're going to, like I said, we're going to actually start painting something specifically, so I hope to see you then. Take care.